Good morning. I am so very, very honored to be here today. I so appreciate the invitation from the Alliance, and I'm very much looking forward to the remainder of the conference. I've certainly enjoyed it thus far. Pardon my bit of croakiness this morning. I have a hotel voice. After a while, the dry air gets to me a little bit, and I get croakier and croakier as the time goes on. So I'm going to be talking with you today in general about executive abilities as these abilities relate to PKU. I think that most of you are aware that this can be a problem area for individuals with PKU, and I want to talk a little about some specifics of PKU in relation to executive abilities, what different types of executive abilities there might be, and some recommendations primarily focused on children with PKU. But you can extend these to yourselves if you're an adult. Just go up a few years and you'll be there. So let's get started right away here. I wanted first to read a quote to you. This is from a statement that was written by myself, Susan Weisbren, and Frankian van Spronsen a couple of years ago in a molecular genetics and metabolism supplement that was focused on PKU in the brain. Numerous advances have been made in our understanding of metabolic disorders over the last century, but optimal outcomes have not been achieved. We stand now on the cusp of a new era of PKU research and treatment. It is time that we thoroughly reevaluate our understanding of PKU so that we may take advantage of current innovations in neuropsychological assessment, scientific technologies, and treatment options that hold promise for improving quality of life for individuals with PKU. So essentially what we're doing here is putting out a call to action. We are on the cusp of a new era here. There are new treatment options. There are new technologies, all kinds of neuroimaging options, so that we can understand PKU in a much more in-depth manner. And we need to keep our momentum going for doing this type of research. So I gave you a bit of an overview previously of what my talk would entail. We're going to talk just a little bit about brain function and then about executive abilities. And I'm going to show you some data today that I hope will sort of drive home the idea that there can be problems in executive abilities in individuals with PKU. I'm going to go through the data part pretty quickly. I just want to show you, flash some images so you can see there are scientific data out there. But if you want more in-depth understanding of that, I'd be happy to sit down with a laptop with anybody and go through that in more detail about how the experiments are run and such. And I really want to get to my recommendations for problems in executive abilities. And then, of course, after all of our panel has completed, we'll be doing some discussion. These show up pretty well on the screen. I like to show these two images. These are images of the brain drawn by participants in our research studies. And this one here is, I believe, from Katie when she was about 2 years of age. And I think this is a good representation of sort of how the brain is put together at 2 years of age. There is more chaos than there is later in development. And we have all kinds of neural mechanisms that prune away the parts that don't need to be there, and we have new growth within the brain as well. And eventually we get to this stage here. This was from Tiara, who I believe was 9 at the time of this drawing. And you can see that she has a much better organized sense of brain development, if you will. And I love the way some of the kids label some of their brain parts and pieces also. So there is a lot of development that's happening. We can't forget that the brain is changing as children age. And when we're thinking about assessment and such, that means we can't just assess at one point in time, at 2 years of age, and think we're done, that that's what the kid's abilities will always look like. Things change over time. All right, I'm going to go through this quickly because you've seen this a couple times now. The neuropathology of PKU, I think you're well aware that we have a problem with phenylalanine metabolism, and that affects tyrosine and dopamine downstream. And what we're concerned about in terms of executive abilities is frontal lobe function. That's the front part of your brain. And dopamine here is a critical neurotransmitter in executive abilities and prefrontal brain function. All right, so that's why the great interest in dopamine in PKU. Now, in more recent years, there has also been an increasing focus on white matter difficulties in individuals with PKU. And the white matter is this stuff that's also called myelin. All right, and what happens is you have the body of your neuron or your nerve cell here, and then you have this axon that allows neural signals to leap from nerve cell to nerve cell, okay, at these synapses. So there would be another neuron out here, and you have these neural signals leaping through your brain, essentially. This myelin, this aqua stuff here I'm showing, allows this leaping of neural signals to happen much more rapidly, okay? So it kind of leaps down these nodes here. And as you can see here, sometimes there's something a little hazy that will show up in the white matter of some individuals with PKU. Not all, but some. And so white matter is increasingly interesting. I will just give you a little teaser here. We did a study recently. This was funded by BioMarin Pharmaceutical, and we looked at people's brains, the white matter of their brains, before they went on to the drug Kuvan. We then looked 6 months later at their brains again with sophisticated neuroimaging techniques, and we did see that in some of these areas, in several of these areas here, the centrum semiovale, parieto-occipital cortex, and corpus callosum. Don't worry about where those are exactly. We'll talk later if you're really that interested. But we did see that there were improvements in the white matter of the brains after 6 months of treatment with Kuvan. What we did not see was changes in thinking abilities and cognition, but we really need to look out farther. I think it stands to reason that you're going to see changes in brain that will be followed by changes in cognition. So we wouldn't expect to see changes in cognition terribly early here as we have the changes in brains, but I'm convinced that we'll see a following there. Now, let's get to the meat of the matter here today, for my talk at least, and that is around executive abilities. Just a quick definition. These abilities allow for the maintenance and coordination of information processing that lead to higher order thought and action. So this is stuff like planning your day out, all right? That allows us to function much, much more efficiently in the world. And if you don't have a plan for your day when you get going for first thing in the morning, you can get through your day, right? But it may not be as efficient. It may not be as pleasant for you or the people around you, for that matter. So these are abilities that are a little harder to define than just vision, for example, or hearing. Or remembering something, but they really overarch all of this so that we can perform really efficiently in our days. These executive abilities, I don't think it would be any surprise, play critical roles in school performance, academics, in our employment. Think about how your day at work needs to be organized and fluid, and at the same time, if something changes, you have to shift directions pretty quickly to get through events at work. Definitely play a role in social skills, and specifically for PKU, play a role in treatment. There is a lot you have to manage as not only an individual with PKU, but the family has to manage. So the family's executive abilities have to be pretty good too. Just to work with the treatments, the dietary regimen and such, that takes quite a bit of planning, as you well know. So these abilities are critical there. And there are also these different components of executive abilities we think about, and I'm going to go through those, not in great gory detail, but in some detail in just a moment. And these include inhibitory control, monitoring of our activities, working memory, and strategic processing. So let's jump right into these now. Okay, inhibitory control. This is a critical piece. This is suppressing information or actions that would interfere with something you want to get done, a goal you're trying to achieve. So for example, and pardon my language for just a moment here, cover your kids' ears. So this would be telling your boss that you think his work is crap, all right? That is not good inhibitory control. It is also not good inhibitory control to use the word crap at a gathering like this, but I want to get my point across, so I apologize if I've offended anyone, but I think you get the message there. This is just blurting something out that you really ought not be blurting out. And in this case, the little girl's peering at the cookie. She knows that if she wants to achieve her goal of watching iCarly in the afternoon, that's not going to happen if she's that cookie. So she's working on inhibitory control. This is the child chasing the ball out into the street. Okay, instead of stopping and knowing that there's danger, I need to look before I go out into the street. So I probably all of us know somebody who has some inhibitory control problems. That's what I'm talking about here. Just envision that person, and you've got the picture there. Now, just to quickly flash some data at you, because I don't want to dwell on this today, there are different kinds of tasks that we can use in the laboratory to get at this. And basically, you have our computer monitor here, and what you see is a series of shapes. And you just hit a button, and I tell you, the kids really do hit the button. Hit the button on a keyboard if you see a shape, unless the shape is a diamond or some other shape we pick out. And then don't do anything. Now, most of the time, I mostly work with kids, so most of the time the kids are going along smacking the button, right? And then this shape occurs, and you have to withhold that response. You have to inhibit that response. That's inhibitory control. So what we see here, if we just look at how many mistakes somebody makes on that task, here we have the control participants. Those are typically developing individuals who don't have any sort of medical disorder or problem. They're always going to be in aqua in my talk, and individuals with PKU will always be in green, all right? So what we see here is that in that no-go, where you need to inhibit that response, we see that the group with PKU is making more errors than our control group, all right? So these are just a bit of data to show you that we can identify this in the laboratory as well as daily life. Now let's move on to response monitoring. This is basically picking up on the fact that you've done something in a way that doesn't make sense. You've made an error, and then adjusting your behavior so you don't keep repeating that error. Have you seen folks who will keep trying the same thing over and over even though that isn't working? Well, that's not very good response monitoring. So you need to know you need to try something different, and you flexibly move on to a different way of doing something. So this woman, I would submit, has been trying the same thing over and over, and she's in need of some help with her. So she now knows she's made a mistake, but she doesn't have the flexibility to try something different. And sometimes that's where we can come in, especially as parents, in terms of saying, okay, let's figure out together a different way to do this. If we look at that same task I was talking about, that go, no-go task where you have to not hit the button on certain occasions, we can look at how quickly people do hit buttons on correct trials, and just look at these bars here. What we see in control participants is that after they make an error, the next time they need to hit that button, they slow down. They say, whoa, I messed up last time. I'm going to slow my response down so that I don't make that error again. So we just see here, this is in milliseconds, that we see that the control participants are slowing down more than our participants with PKU. And that suggests that the participants with PKU in that group, that they are not monitoring as well, and they're not adjusting their performance to the level we might expect. So they're not sitting back and saying, whoa, I need to slow down a little bit more and adjust my performance, okay? So those are some data we have to show that response monitoring can be difficult for some individuals with PKU. Excuse me. Now let's turn to working memory for a moment. Now this is maintenance and manipulation of information, blah, 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 for brief periods of time. That's a fancy schmancy definition. Basically, this is holding on to information while you do something with it. And I think the best example of this is looking up a telephone number, I would say in the phone book, but nobody uses phone books anymore, I guess. Let's say you look up a phone number on your computer, and what are you doing with that phone number while you walk to the next room to get the phone? You're saying it over and over in your head. Or if you're like me, you're actually saying it out loud. You're rehearsing the information. That is your working memory at work, okay? And what happens then if your kid comes up and starts yanking on your arm and saying, I want to go swimming, I want to go swimming, I want to go swimming, before you have finished that trip to the telephone? Do you still have the number in your head? I don't, anyway. This is very fragile, this working memory. So it's very easily disrupted. And this plays a role in all kinds of activities. For example, acquiring vocabulary. When we're reading, you have to know what happened at the beginning, or conversation for that matter. You have to know what happened at the beginning of a sentence to make sense of what you're hearing at the end of the sentence, right? So you're holding all that information online, you're manipulating it, you're putting it together until you get to the end of that sentence, and then you can make sense of it. Maybe. I do have a tendency to run-on sentences that may exceed some people's working memory capacity, including my own, but anyway, so important in reading, in computing, and mathematics, knowing that what the numbers are you need to manipulate while you go through division, addition, moving this number from here to there, carrying over and such. Critical in spelling, in comprehension of information, whether that's auditory or visual information, and then just, again, carrying on conversation, keeping track of the flow of the conversation, what's happening from one moment to the next, making sense of all that. In terms of a little bit of data, again, I don't want to get too caught up on the tasks and such, but we have looked at a variety of types of information. If it's verbal information, so here we just use some letters or just some objects that aren't terribly easy to stick a verbal label on, or locations of little boxes. If we look at how much of that information somebody can hold on to, we see consistently across these different types of material that the control participants in our study are holding on to a little bit more information than the individuals with PKU. And that's the case regardless of what type of material we're looking at. All right? So whether it's letters that someone's seeing, words, where things are in space, more information is able to be held by people who don't have PKU than people who do have PKU. All right? And remember, I'm generalizing here in all of these examples across groups. This doesn't speak to the abilities of any single individual. We're all individuals, and some people are going to have better working memory abilities, some poor working memory abilities. But this is just at the group level I'm talking about. And one point I'd like to make here is going back to those early slides that had sort of the chaotic brain and the better organized brain. Things change over time for everyone as we grow. And what we have here are working memory data. I showed you verbal information, I showed you spatial information, nonverbal information. What I've done here is just collapse across all of that information to get how many items a person can maintain, can remember. And down here is age. And what I want you to see here, in the aqua, we have what happens as a function of age for individuals in our control group. So down here, working memory for younger kids, I think it's kind of obvious, is not as good as it is for the older kids, right? So we have a progression in working memory abilities as we age. And that's the case for so many things: vocabulary abilities, spelling, understanding reading materials, and such. If we look here at the line then as a function of age for individuals with PKU, what we see is at the younger ages, they look pretty similar to the controls. But as individuals with PKU are aging here, they're not keeping pace with what's happening for our control participants. So the bottom line of this slide is, of these data are, that with age, some things in executive abilities can get a little bit worse as some people with PKU age. All right, so that's something we want to keep an eye on. So again, I want to drive home this point that you can't think about what a child's abilities are like at 6 or 7 years of age and believe that that's exactly what they're going to be like at 17. We need to think about all of these issues and how they're developing over time. There's also strategic processing, and this is flexibly evaluating goals. Here I put up the example of someone doing grocery shopping. I know that when my husband goes grocery shopping, that I do a little executive processing for him in advance by giving him a grocery list. And I actually organize the grocery list by the departments he will come to first. So I put the produce, the fruits and vegetables, and then the lunch meats, and then the bread. Now, and this serves two purposes. Then I get what I wanted from the grocery store, and then it keeps him from going down certain aisles, like the cookie aisle and such also. So I just skip over those several aisles there, and he goes right on about his business. I don't have a whole lot longer here to talk with you, so I just want to tell you that this is something that can be problematic for individuals with PKU also. I'm going to skip over a little data here. I hope you believe me at this point that there can be problems for some individuals with PKU in these executive abilities. And what I want to get to here, I know I'm skipping a lot of data, I want to get to optimizing outcomes. All right, so here's what I want to leave you with in several slides here. Maintain fee control across the lifespan is my view. I know that some people, there's still some discussion about this. I very strongly believe that all of the data I have seen point to maintaining fee control across the lifespan. I believe that's absolutely critical. I also believe that in clinics, in the metabolic clinics, this is where you're talking about PKU, that there should be discussion and even formal screening for problems in cognition, for psychiatric issues, problems in adaptive function. There needs to be ongoing discussion with your metabolic doc and your dietitians, nutritionists and such about these sorts of issues. And if there's a problem, a referral needs to be made to someone who is appropriate to do a more in-depth assessment around psychological, psychiatric, cognitive sorts of issues. Right, and it may not be that one assessment's going to do it. It may be that a few years later you need to go back and see where things stand at that point. And then, of course, any sort of health care, this goes for everyone, my 94-year-old mother-in-law or your 2-year-old kid with PKU, right? Treatment needs to be coordinated across all of your health care professionals. There are different ways that Susan Weisbrand and others have talked about screening for problems in the PKU clinic, and there are different sort of screening measures that can be used. I've listed a few here. I'm not going to go through all of these today, but there are checklists that parents can do for their kids and older kids can do for themselves in metabolic clinics that can really be helpful in sort of tracking over time where changes may be occurring. What's getting better for a kid with PKU? What's getting worse for a kid with PKU? Or is everything staying the same? And this could have an influence on treatment recommendations also. Now, in general, I've already talked about all of this. I just want to reiterate the first bullet point, really watch those fee levels. And if we have maybe some teenagers in the audience today, please watch those fee levels. Your brain is still changing, and it will be into your early 20s, actually. And that white matter is primarily what's changing. So you got to keep control of those fee levels while that brain is still developing, and then beyond. Our brains never stop changing and learning and growing. You might want to consider school evaluations. Some school systems will do this. You may have to advocate for your child to get the attention they need in terms of the evaluation. So sometimes you got to be a pretty tough cookie and go in there fighting for those evaluations. Neuropsychological evaluations will give you a more in-depth look at things outside the academics. So with a school or educational type of evaluation, you're going to look at reading, writing, arithmetic, right? With a neuropsychological assessment, you're going to be more focused on memory abilities, language abilities, executive abilities, all of which play a role in these academic abilities. So that can be very helpful if your child is struggling, or an adult for that matter, is struggling in school or in an employment setting. Sometimes we see the need for a more general psychological evaluation, some counseling if there are social or behavioral difficulties. And sometimes Kevin's going to talk a little bit, Dr. Anshel is going to talk a little bit today about ADHD, if I get off the stage and yield to my colleagues here in a couple minutes. So you'll hear about that. Sometimes medication can be helpful for that, or for depression. So you want to keep all of this in mind and talk with your physicians about all of these issues. In terms of school, you want a really structured environment. Get as much of that one-on-one as you can. If it's possible that tutoring can take place, that can be so beneficial. You want to be sure that your environment enhances attention. So ask that your teachers seat the child where he or she is not sitting looking out a window all day if attentions are problematic for them. There may be a need for extra time for assignments in the schoolwork. Covering up all but one of the math problems of a page of 20, instead of having those 20 problems sort of glaring at the child. Cover all of them up except one or two, and then move down the page. A lot of this really is common sense, but teachers with a classroom of 25 students don't always have time to put that common sense that they have and they're so good at into effect for one child. So you may need to step in and do some of these sorts of things. And then in the home, just a couple of items here that I would leave you with. Keep your routine as regular as possible for the child with executive abilities. That's not to say you don't want the occasional surprise, let's go out for a movie, but in general, day to day during the school week, you want to keep things as regular as possible. Keeping a calendar can be helpful for older children and definitely for adults. I don't know what I'd do without my my calendar to keep track of what I'm supposed to be doing and where I'm supposed to be doing it. You want to pick very specific locations for things like car keys, backpacks, important materials. We keep a basket by the front door, and my kids, her shoes go into that basket. I know it's right in the living room, but her shoes go into that basket, her backpack, her lunchbox. And if they're anywhere else in the house, she gets a good hollering at to go and get those things so that we're ready to go the next morning. These kinds of things, again, that are pretty much common sense can make a big difference in how your day goes for your child, how the day goes for your family. Just think about sort of the screeching that could go on in the morning if you're not organized, and it's not the best time of day to be putting your executive abilities to work. Put them to use the night before, so that you don't have all that screeching in the morning trying to get out the door. That's the way it is in my house anyway. I'm gonna leave you with this, and I would again encourage you, if there are children and teens out in the audience, please control your fee levels and listen to your folks and let them help you to use executive abilities in the best way that you can. Thank you.